Welcome to week 9. This is your lecture for week 9. I've decided this week to just show you my screen and not my face because really, how much beauty can you take in one semester? I think you need a break from my beauty, and even though I didn't record a lecture last week, maybe a 2-week break is enough to allow you to then re-see my beauty next week and be okay. It's probably too long on beauty. But we're not doing a lot of on aesthetics this semester, so talking about my own beauty might be helpful. This week we're going to talk about governance, and we're talking about governance in order to lead us to talking about ethics. And ethics is one of the major subfields of philosophy, and it's my most the field that I find most interesting in philosophy. We're starting with governance because I think it's a good way to really start to conceptualize what it means to talk about ethics, but also because we're in the middle of an election season. Well, we're not in the middle. We're coming right up on the end of an election season, and thinking about what it means to be governed or what it means to allow governance is an important question at this time. So, in order to start thinking about governance, I think we have to think about how do we treat each other? How must we demand to be treated? What does it mean to live next door to somebody? Let's call her Ruth. What does it mean to live next door to Ruth? Is Ruth a good person? Is she a bad person? Does that really matter? Is Ruth an individual? Is she part of society? Does that matter? I think for the most part, day to day, we just want to know that Ruth is not going to come into our yard and kill us. Because Ruth could be a vile, horrible person. In thinking about a society, we have to think about what it means to live next door to Ruth. How must we treat her? And how must we demand that she treats us? There's been a lot of answers to this question. And those answers have come in many different ways through many different fields of study. Let's just imagine, before we get into some of those answers, a tree in a garden, a tree in a garden with fruit, a special fruit, a fruit that we all want. Now, we can go to our religious stories of Adam and Eve in a garden, two original beings in a garden who are tempted by this thing that they're told they're not allowed to have. It's a very odd story. It's an interesting story. It's used over and over. But I think that actually the symbol of that tree can mean a lot of different things in a lot of different cultures. And I want to imagine that I am standing on one side of this tree and Ruth is standing on the other. Let's hope we're both clothed because, I don't want to see Ruth naked. We're standing on this tree and we have these apples between us, and we need to decide who gets the apples. When do we get the apples? Do we share the apples? Do I get more apples because I'm bigger than Ruth and I can beat her up? Does she get more apples because she's more devious than I and she can kill me in my sleep? Who gets the apples? The ways that we decide who gets those apples are questions of governance. Who controls the tree and who determines how the society gets those apples? These questions are really essential, I think, to our being. We can look at most of the questions of philosophy and say, well, what it means to be a soul, or whether or not you have a soul, or what it means to be an individual, or questions of I and thou. Those questions are all interesting. They're fun to talk about. They're really cool things to talk about when you're sitting around with drinks or other substances, just trying to get to meaning of life. Those are really fun things. But questions of governance affect us at a very deep level on a day-to-day basis. How do I know that we're going to be able to drive on the same street together? And if I ever stop to think about that, if I ever stop to think about the fact that you're driving 80 miles an hour next to me and you're kind of an idiot, if I have to drive next to Ruth, it's going to freak me out unless I have some sense of governance. Ruth, man, I don't know that I want to meet her in a street filled with people. How do I know I can trust her? How do I know I can trust any of these people? This is a scary thing. Look at all these people. And this is even way before pre-COVID. Obviously, this picture is from the 60s or 70s, early 70s. How do I know I can trust these people? Who are they? What are they going to do to me, to each other? How do I know I can trust that dude without a mask in the grocery store? This question of the masks is a pretty interesting question. It's a question of ethics. You know, how do we treat each other? It's a question of morality on whether or not we have a moral right to demand that somebody else wears a mask, or whether or not the other person has a moral responsibility to wear a mask or not wear a mask. It's also a question of governance. Can we tell each other to wear a mask? Should we be able to tell each other to wear a mask? I mean, it's a question of personal safety or not. You know, who knows what the claims are or where those claims come from. But the question of a mask is, at its nature, a question of governance. What right does a government take when they tell us to wear a mask? What right do we take when we demand that others wear masks? What right do we demand when we say that others should wear masks, or when we say we should not wear a mask? Do we need philosophy to answer this? Actually, I think philosophy might help us understand more. It might help us understand why the dude on the left is demanding, and why the dude on the dudette on the right is demanding, and how they're misunderstanding natures of governance and living in a society together. Let's look at some answers or some suggestions. Aristotle, that dude from ancient Greece, student of Plato, who was a student of Socrates. So Aristotle's the grand student of Socrates. He is the teacher of Alexander the Great, one of the major philosophical names in our history. And he had a lot of ideas, a lot of important things that he talked about. He talked about drama, he talked about rhetoric, he talked about mathematics and science. And one of the areas was politics, and he tried to determine what it means to govern each other. Aristotle's philosophy comes from a place of believing that human nature is flawed. We can't really trust ourselves. I'm going to do things that I don't want to do, or that I don't think I should do, and I'm going to feel bad about it, and I can't trust myself. And the reason why we know it's flawed is because we have a common morality. We all believe in right and wrong, and we all believe that there are things that we should do and shouldn't do, and most of those beliefs jive with each other. You know, maybe you believe you shouldn't wear white after Labor Day. That's probably not a moral belief, but you probably believe that I shouldn't steal apples off your tree, or you shouldn't steal apples off mine. That is a more moral belief. Aristotle said we had this moral center, this part of who we are as a person, built into us by some creator that gave us a sense of right and wrong. But because human nature is flawed, we can't always trust on that moral center to guide us, and so we need governance. We need to make sure that we are going to be pure. We are going to stay with our morality, and so we need governance. How do we find that governance? Well, Aristotle said there are a few ways of finding governance. We could find governance through a single individual, a monarchy, a king or a queen who tells us what we should or should not do based on this sense of common morality. Or we can find governance through an aristocracy, sorry, through a group of people who are a little more powerful than the rest of us, who it's a select number, but they have more power, presumably more wisdom than the rest of us. Or we can find governance through the polity, polity, the all of us who watch each other, who create rules, who create a society where we are watching each other to ensure that our flawed human nature does not allow our society to go off the rails. In essence, in this really beautiful graphic representation of governance, the pink is our common morality. The white dots are the ways that we keep each other in line. That is our each individual selves keeping each other in line within the inside this common morality that oversees us all. You may not find that description satisfying, and there are some problems with it. Who's to say we all believe the same thing? Who's to say that that your morality is my morality? And who's to say that there's a thing called morality? There are some problems with it. How can we trust a society that is built on right and wrong? Hobbes comes out with a different answer. Hobbes is writing in the mid 1600s, and he is trying to find an explanation for why we allow governance to happen. Why should anybody tell me what to do? And why should we allow it to happen? Why do we let kings be? Well, for Hobbes, human nature is flawed, just like Aristotle. He thinks we've got problems. We aren't consistent. We are not loving good folk. Maybe God is not always at the center of who we are. And one of the problems with that flawed human nature is when I live next door to Ruth, I have no idea who the hell she is. I have no idea whether or not she's going to treat me well. And in fact, left to our own devices, we'd probably end up killing each other because she plays her music too loud, or because she dances in her yard, or because she doesn't like the way that I yell at my dog, or because she doesn't like the way I don't mow my lawn. And because we are flawed and because we can't trust each other, how do we know we can survive? How do we know that our individual lives are going to keep on going if I can't trust Ruth? Well, for Hobbes, the answer is clear. You don't know. You live in a world where you cannot know what's going to happen because it is so chaotic and you can't trust anybody. So, what do? Well, you rely on governance. It's the only way to find peace is to find governance. And what is that governance? Well, we can't rely on a whole bunch of people to govern us because, people are chaotic. And once you start to expand that government by leaps and bounds to a whole bunch of people, chaos is going to happen. So we rely on a sovereign, a single ruler who will tell us what to do. Ideally, that single ruler is moral and just herself. Ideally, she has an idea of how we will live and how we can live in prosperity. And ideally, she is kind and loving, but we need her in order to organize us. Because if not, Ruth is going to get into my shit, and I'm going to have to kill her. That's Hobbes's Leviathan, this beast that needs to be controlled. Not everybody, after the 1600s, found this to be a satisfactory idea. And in fact, in the late 1700s, early 1800s, the world started to shift a little bit, where monarchy, this sovereign ruler, started to lose power. And in one of those places it shifted was in the colonies of Great Britain in the United States. This is what the people of the United States said through their representative government. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. We should stop right there. Okay, clearly, the people who wrote and signed the Declaration of Independence, the early government of the early United States, did not really believe that statement. All men are created equal. Well, they believed it. They fully believed it. They thought they were being genuine. But the problem was they didn't really understand what they meant when they said all men, or they were pretty blinding of their own moral sense when they said all men. Because for them, what they were really saying is there's a dude above us, he's stronger than us, and he has more power than us, and we want we want him to recognize our common humanity. So of course, all men are created equal. We're equal to him. What they didn't bother to do was to look down to people with less power than they, to women, to children, to black people, to slaves, to people with less money, to farmers, to anybody that did not have the same power as they were not included in that all men. Does that make this document flawed? I don't think so. I think what it means is the people who wrote it were flawed. They didn't really believe the words that they were saying for all people, or they didn't see how it should expand to all people. But the ideas in it are pretty amazing. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, all people, are created equal. That they are endowed by their creator, if they're created equal, there's got to be a creator, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. That means the rights that cannot be pushed away from them. You cannot lose these rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It still is pretty astounding that they could write about liberty on one hand and then own slaves on the other. Yet, all men, all people, have unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So, in the Declaration of Independence, the people that were signing those, I'm avoiding those words, founding fathers, those people that signed that Declaration of Independence were saying that governments have to grow out of the people. They cannot be cast upon the people. There cannot be some ruler who emerges from the people and declares that they are now the ruler. Governments are instituted among men, among the people that are created equal, and they derive their powers from our consent. Governments cannot exist unless they are given consent by the people that are being governed. The declaration then goes on to list all the crimes of King George, and at the end says, "And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, our sacred honor." The statement here declares that government comes from the people and that it requires a pledge to each other. It is not only a government that comes from the people, it is a government that is ensured by this pledge that you hold my life, you hold my fortune, and you hold my honor in your hands because I hold yours. Ruth and I have to get along. We have to get along because we are in a contract. And so we turn to Rousseau, who was writing a little bit before that Declaration of Independence. Human nature is self-determined. It's not flawed. It's not unflawed. What it means is you can't tell me that my nature is flawed. You can't tell me that what I believe is wrong. You can't tell me that I need to change my behavior. We are self-determined. Ruth can do whatever she wants in her yard because she has a right to be who she is. Because human nature is self-determined and because we want to protect that right, we have to enter in a social contract. I have to agree to let Ruth be, and Ruth has to agree to let me be. I think she's an asshole, but still, she can be an asshole if she wants. Or she doesn't have to rely on my judgment. She can just be, and I can just be, and we have to coexist. And how do we do that? Well, we coexist by recognizing each other's rights to be. That we have to make decisions about how to be together based on those mutual rights to be, which means that we have a governance of our individual lives by all. Everyone has a right to voice what they believe they believe we should be governed, and that right to voice leads to a governance by majority, which leads us into the next idea. The social contract is a really fascinating idea because what it means is we don't live in a society that is determined by common morality, or we don't live in a society that is determined by common chaos. We live in a society that is built through the fabric of our individual lives coming together and relying on each other to ensure that these individual lives have meaning. Ruth and I can stand at the tree and we can determine between us what are the rules that govern that tree. Here's where the social contract gets interesting. We have this idea of governance in the middle, this governance based on contract, and then we have the people surrounding it. 4 of these people wanted that form of governance in the middle. 2 did not. How does that happen? How do we make sure those 2 are okay? Do we then kill them? Are they kicked out? Do they not belong? No, they are actually protected in a social contract because the truth of the matter is we all have our individual beliefs and our individual wants and our individual desires, our individual identities, and some of those are similar, some of those aren't. And when it comes to voting on governance, the most similarities are going to come together and vote for the common governance. A couple of people are going to be outliers, but we want to protect those outliers because it's going to turn out at some point that we ourselves will find ourselves being outliers at one point or another. All the things that I believe are not all the things that you believe, and you and I may believe that we should all wear masks when we go out in public, but we may believe very different things about who has the right to vote or what age you should vote. We want our common belief about masks to be put into place, so we vote that way. We want our individual beliefs about voting to be put into place, so we vote that way. Now, when we vote that way, we are voting with other people who commonly believe with us, and the whole circle of this commonality of beliefs leads us into the contract. Because I know I've got some beliefs that you're not going to agree with. And someday you're going to be in the majority and I'm going to be in the minority. And I want my right to believe those things. I want my right to vote for those things to be protected. We started this semester thinking about epistemology. How do I know I exist? How do I know my mind exists? How do I know what I experience, what I believe, what I think, what I feel? How do I know those things are real? What is consciousness? What is knowledge? We move to metaphysics. Why is my being important? Is there a God or are there gods who determine what my being is? How does that belief in gods or belief in not gods, how does belief determine what is true? We're moving now to ethics. What actions can I take? What actions should I take? What actions should I not take? What does this say about our relationships with each other? How do we enter into relationships with each other? And how do these relationships rely on a sense of governance? These are important questions. Now, the first 2 areas are a little bit abstract. And, if you don't ever come to a determination of what those areas, what you believe about those areas, you still might be able to live your life okay, and without ever determining whether or not your mind is real. Most people don't ever want to think about that. But governance, you have to determine that. You have to participate in that. You don't really have a choice because the truth of the matter is we cannot walk around as individuals who are not affected by those people around us. We can't rely on a society where individuals are going to walk around without any belief that they're a part of something bigger. Because once we do that, once that governance breaks down, then we may well lead into chaos. Or at the very least, we're never going to be quite certain that what we exist in is a world that is free of danger from other people. Now, you may argue, well, you can have governance without a set government, and we just kind of agree to get along within our little pockets. But the truth of the matter is that little agreeing to get along, that's governance. And having a philosophy of governance, while we don't necessarily need to state it to be individuals in a society, thinking about that philosophy helps to firm up issues like, should you wear a mask? Or why is it okay to be told to wear a mask? This leads us into a notion of democracy. I study democracy. I think it's a fascinating topic, and I think it's probably the most important sense of what it means to be together, as far as governance goes, but also, a sense of what it means for you and I to be able to drive in the same hallway or same highway or walk down the same hallway. What it means for us to be and for us to respect each other. I think there's a core of democracy that relies on that. And when I say democracy, I'm not talking about what a politician says when they say democracy. I'm talking about a philosophical idea of democracy. Democracy is based on social contract. It is based on one person, one vote. And we can take that word vote and move it from this thing that you put into a ballot box to your voice. One person, one voice. You have a right to voice your ideas with the understanding that I have a right to voice mine. We move from this idea of one person, one vote to a governance by the majority. You have your vote, Ruth has her vote, I have mine. Whomever is the majority within those three votes, that's where the governance goes. We do have a majority here, but we also have to have a minority protection within governance. And understand, I'm not talking about racial minority. I'm talking about majority of opinion versus minority of opinion. And that minority protection is vital within a democratic governance, because once the minority goes away, you no longer have democratic discourse. All you have is monolithic discourse. You're moving back to an Aristotelian idea of this moral center, or you're moving to a Hobbesian idea of a totalitarian control. The minority has to be protected. Individual liberty has to be protected. But it also has to be protected within the sense of a common good. Your individual liberties cannot impinge upon my individual liberties. You can't take away my liberties just because you want more. Ruth can't claim that apple tree. And here's why democracy is really such a beautiful idea. Because reciprocity matters in democracy. I don't like Ruth. I think she's an asshole. I don't like who she's voting for. I hate that sign in front of her house. I don't like what she wears. I don't like the music she listens to. I don't like to see her face. But I should fight to the death to protect both Ruth and that damn dog. I've got to make sure that Ruth has a voice. And why? Because I want her to make sure that I have a voice. I want her to respect my voice. And so I'm going to make sure that she can speak, she can vote in this society. Now, the truth of the matter is, Ruth may not be as honorable as I am. She may want to try to silence my voice or other people's voices. She may not. She may really be pushing to make sure other people can't vote. I still have to protect her. But here's what the thing about reciprocity. I have to protect her because I want to make sure that I have a claim to voting. I also want to make sure that those other people that she's trying to squelch have a claim to voting. And if I'm going to do that, then ultimately I have to protect her right to vote too. Reciprocity leads to democracy because it guarantees that ultimately we are moving towards a future where everyone has a voice. Everyone is included in the social contract. We are a few days away from the end of our election season. Here's the thing about voting. When you vote with 200 million people, your one vote will not swing that election. But your one vote is an act of faith within this democracy. When you vote, you are demanding your voice is heard, and you are demanding that other people's voices are heard. You are engaging in the reciprocity of democracy. Voting by itself, it may not actually do much by an individual vote. It does do a lot when a lot of people vote. The reason why it matters is because you are demanding a sense of the social contract. You are demanding that other people's votes matter when you vote. It is very, very easy to throw away your vote. To vote for Kermit the Frog. To vote for a candidate that has no chance of winning. To vote for somebody because you hate the other candidate so much. It's very easy to vote against your own voice. But when you do that, you are not voting democratically. You're voting for another sense of governance, a belief that governance doesn't matter, or a belief that your fate is always going to be determined by a stronger power, or a belief that your common humanity is going to actually vote to protect morality. When you do not vote in a meaningful way, you are throwing away a belief in democracy. Ultimately, whether or not you vote doesn't maybe determine much for your own life. And I'm not going to criticize you. You have a right to decide. But I believe in democracy. And while voting is a flawed form of democracy, it is one of the very first ways we have to demand democracy. We're coming up on the election in the state of Michigan. You can register to vote up until the day of on the day of election. It's going to be a little bit crowded at that point, but you can still do it. Go register to vote. Participate in your democracy. Demand that your voice is heard and that others' voices are heard. That's a sense of governance. Next week, we're going to start talking about ethics and why it matters that we talk about what we do. I hope you have a good weekend. Have a good week. We'll talk to you next week.